Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I welcome you to this afternoon's webinar on water security, focusing on policy, innovation, and adoption. I am Erin Jordan, Strategic Programs Officer at the IWA, and I'll take you through some short housekeeping rules to help you understand how to navigate the webinar. So, just a bit of background information. Please be reminded that this webinar will be recorded and made available on demand on the IWA Connect Plus platform, as well as the IWA Network website with the presentation, slides, and any other relevant information. Also, the speakers are responsible for making sure that they have the copyright permissions to present any of the work that they will be sharing with you today. Also, the opinions, hypotheses, conclusions, or recommendations contained in these presentations and other materials are the sole responsibility of the speakers, and they do not necessarily reflect IWA's opinion. So, for the attendees, you will be able to communicate with the panelists and the other attendees via chat and the Q&A box. In the chat, please take some time to introduce yourself, say where you're joining us from, as well as any other connecting networking information you would like to share. In the Q&A box, please ask your directed questions to the panelists. Also, there is an option to raise your hand, but as you are unable to be heard or seen, we will not be able to respond to that. So if you do feel the need to raise your hand, I do encourage you to ask your question in the Q&A box. So now I'd like to hand over to Professor Jan Hoffman to give you some more information about the webinar.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for being here, and yeah, it's great to see so many people again for this webinar. My name is Jan Hofman. I'm working at the University of Bath, where I'm director of the Water Innovation and Research Center, and yeah, where we are doing research around water security, and all kinds of broad things around the whole breadth of water. This is a third webinar in the series on water security that Blanca Antizar and I are organizing. And the goal of this webinar series is to actually raise awareness of what is called the water security topic. And what we are trying to do is establish links and showcase links between water security and specific areas like innovation, capacity building, the SDGs, finance and economics for projects, and also topics like governance. And yeah, Blanca will organize a similar webinar like this tomorrow, which will be in the Spanish language. We always do an English version and a Spanish version of the webinar to actually bring in more people and create more access to this information. Today, the webinar will focus on 2 or 3 things related to water security, which is policy, innovation, and adoption. So how can we adopt new ways of working and innovation for creating water security? The initiative of this webinar was taken already 2 years ago, and it is complementary to the activities Blanca and I are organizing at the IWA flagship conferences. We started in Kigali in 2023 at the Water Development Congress. We continue with the workshop at the World Water Congress last year in Toronto, and hopefully we can have another workshop on the topic in this year later on in Bangkok when the new Water Development Conference is again. And yeah, for today we have a lineup of very important and very interesting speakers. I will introduce them in a bit. But I show you now the agenda for today. I will give a short introduction about the topic and the 3 aspects we want to cover. Then we will have the 3 presentations from Ruben, Alexandra, and Lara. And in the end, I will moderate the questions and answers again, and hand over finally to Aaron to close the session. And I think Aaron also has some additional information about the Water Development Congress coming up later this year. So, what are we talking about when we talk about water security? What is water security? Well, I think in the film that Aaron showed us, it all already became clear. And we are basically talking about how to safeguard the value of water, the value that water can create for our daily life, and for keeping us healthy. And also protecting us against the water in times of flooding and droughts, protecting us against water-related disasters. And of course, there are big challenges in the world around water. We have climate change, we have population growth, and therefore pollution, and we are extracting excessive amounts of water for actually trying to stay healthy, to grow our food, and to produce our goods we need for living. And of course, water security is a key aspect of life. Without water security, we are unable to keep our health, to support our life with food, and also the industrial processes and energy production, for instance, would come to a halt if we would not have water security. So and I think that importance is already mentioned or taken up by, for instance, the European Union. European Union now is looking into water resilience for a sustainable future, and actually with the new European Commission coming in, we have a commissioner dedicated fully to the environment, water resilience, and the competitive circular economy. Which is Jessica Roswell, and I had the pleasure to meet her 2 weeks ago. So for the topic for today, we are looking into policies, and policies have an important impact on water security. There are a number of key elements we need to look into, things like legislation, putting the right legislation in place for supporting and creating water security. Developing integrated water resource management plans on a national or even regional, or even also a transnational level if we are thinking about cross-boundary river basins. And of course, we need financial mechanisms to support the projects. And we can learn from the best practices that are in the field, implementation projects. We can learn from taking citizens' participation into account in the decision making, and strengthening the interinstitutional coordination in water management. And of course, there are challenges, and the challenges is something we hopefully can hear about in this webinar. So policy adaptation, balancing between the different sectors. So where is the water going, which we need? Is it going to agriculture? Do we use it for human consumption, or are we letting it to the industry? And of course, there are all kinds of bureaucratic challenges with the different institutions managing our water system. And then, of course, we need innovation. Innovation is there to improve things. So looking at new treatment technologies that enable water reuse if we don't have enough water, to reduce the water used by agriculture by using precision agriculture, and developing new treatment technologies and materials for that will improve the efficiency of water use. And all that can, of course, be improved by promotion and research, but we also have to look at the challenges in this field, which are coming from costs, high costs for implementation, looking into the acceptance of the new technologies, and yeah, overcoming the big gap between research in the lab and developing the actual innovation into yeah, technologies that can be used by practice. And then thirdly, we have to look into the adoption of water security practices. So how can we actually change our way we are dealing with water? And that needs, of course, education and awareness. That's what we are why we are doing these webinars. It needs economic and financial incentives to, yeah, push us forward in an economic way, and of course strengthen capacity in the area. And again, here there are challenges to look at. Changes in habits and behaviors are often difficult to achieve. They are very rooted in the use of water. There is, of course, resistance to the adoption of new practices. And yeah, we have to look at equity in the area, and make sure that everyone can have the same information, can use the same resources, and that no one is left behind when we are talking about water security. And of course, there's always this factor of resistance by cultural factors involved. So yeah, these are the three topics we would like to cover in this lecture or in this webinar today. And as said, we have three very important and very renowned speakers to offer. We start with Ruben Fernandes, who is the Chief Executive of the water utility in Porto in Portugal. Then we go to Alexandra Campbell-Ferrari, who is a co-founder and executive director of the Center for Water Security and Cooperation in the United States, but she also knows a lot about Europe and how water management is done in the European Union. And then finally, we go to Lara Egbiola Martial, who is technical engineer and the project manager at SRT Consultants. Also, she is going to look into innovation and how to adopt innovation. So with that, I would like to give the floor further to Ruben. I give up my remote control, and Ruben, you can take control now. You're muted, Ruben.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear.
Yeah.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
so thanks first of all for the invitation to be here. It's a pleasure. I'm going to talk about the topic from three different perspectives, okay? And because I have a lot of information, I will not go like in very in depth on each of the perspectives, but any questions that you have, please let me know. So just let you know that well, in Porto, in the city of Porto, located in Portugal, the municipality has a strategy, a circular strategy for the city, and in this strategy, some of the things that I'm going to talk in a few minutes are already there. For instance, when we are talking about water efficiency, the strategy already focuses on the reduction of non-revenue water. When we are talking about finding new sources of water, the reuse of treated wastewater, but also the use of stormwater to meet some other needs is also considered. And there's a third dimension that I'm keeping like in secret for now, that I'm going to speak about in my last minutes of presentation. So basically, when we are thinking about water security, we think about these five dimensions: safety, resilience, quality, efficiency, and sustainability at the end. And all the three perspectives that I'm bringing into the table, they have all these five dimensions, or they take these five dimensions into consideration. On one hand, we have, well, for some years now, a water security plan. Actually, at least at the national level, at the Portuguese national level, I think it is the most complete water security plan that you can find here. Because it maps all the risks that that our system can face. It maps all the events. It then intersects risks and events, and then it defines for each intersection an action plan to deal with it. Also, part of this water safety plan are a number of projects. Okay, the water supply master plan, the alternative supply plan, the water supply contingency plan, and the emergency communication plan for water supply. So these are four very important pieces of this water safety plan. At the moment, we are revising the plan. We are about to have the third generation of this plan in place. This revision takes into account the guidelines of the World Health Organization. And actually, I think that in Portugal, we are the only utility that has a plan that has been revised for 3 times, so that is already in its third generation. In addition to that, we have been dealing with the problem of non-revenue water. And when the public company was created back in 2006, we had water losses that would amount more than 54%. And in less than 18 years, and because we have put a strategic program to deal with this issue in place, we have been able to reduce to 12% more or less. This strategic program is usually compared to an octopus because it has like many harms. And these are the harms of our non-revenue water program that goes from having people listening to the pipe listeners, to our old good friends called the DMAs, to a toolbox completely based on AI, which is our most recent tool that we have within this program. And all of this together, okay, just to give you an idea, explains the success that we have in the company when it comes to reducing non-revenue water. These are some images, okay, of what's happening in some of those boxes that you saw earlier, our famous pipe listeners here that we don't want to get rid of, at least in the near future. This is our journey, okay, since the creation of the company till 2024. Just to let you know that at the moment we are carrying out this study to evaluate the economic value of losses that will indicate us if we are already at our optimal level or if we can reduce even if we can even go below the 12% without losing money, okay? And these are the savings. On the other hand, so the second action or the second project that we are implementing is focused on water reuse, okay? This is a pilot project that we implemented in one of our biggest plants, wastewater treatment plants. Basically, it is comprised of a modular MBR that treats water, that provides an additional step of treatment to wastewater that comes directly from our biological reactor. Then the water is stored again in our installation. And these are some images of this pilot project. It allows us to produce only 1,000 cubic meters of reused water, Class A reused water per day, that it is stored and it is completely used nowadays. Class A water can be used for many non-potable uses. In our cases, we are using it mainly to clean up the streets and public spaces of Porto. As you can see in this table, these are the criteria defined by the Portuguese law regarding the reused water, and you can see for all the parameters that are mandatory by law, we are below those parameters, which is completely okay. This pilot was very important for us because at the moment we are finishing a project to transform our wastewater treatment plants into something else that will align with the new urban wastewater directive. And in fact, from this project, we got a lot of input regarding the future of reused water in the city of Porto. Okay. And finally, my last perspective is a sponge cities perspective. The city of Porto has to deal nowadays with flooding phenomena that puts in risk people and activities. And because of that, we have developed a program that we call Porto Mais Permeável, which means in English, a more permeable Porto. And this program, like in a nutshell, basically aims at implementing new practices of urban design in the city based on sustainable drainage solutions. It is a program that looks at the plot scale, but also at the street level, public square level, and finally at the basin level. So it comprises like big solutions, like big retention basins based on nature-based solutions that can actually help us solve like the most severe problems in Portugal, but also it looks it looks at the kind of small solutions that we can implement at the plot level, at the street level, that will also help us to solve more localized problems. And the rationale is the same, is using nature-based solutions. But why do you do well? This program is being successful because the first thing that we've done was to set up a governance model, okay, involving all the key stakeholders. We recognize that we alone we could not solve this problem, so we have the municipality of Porto with us, the Portuguese Environmental Agency, the community, real estate developers, also the academia, in order to help us to solve this problem. And why do we think that this program can also concur to water security? It's because, well, we want to have a city that allows water to infiltrate more and more. And by infiltrating more and more, we can increase our underground water levels and create healthy underground water levels that will allow for further use, for further extraction and use for potable uses, but also will allow us to have more healthy green areas that will, at the end of the day, help the city to fight the heat waves, for instance, that we face in the summer. And just to give you an example, and this is my last slide, this is all the wells that you can find in a small city like Porto, and that can be used at the end of the day to infiltrate stormwater whenever it rains a lot. Okay, but at the moment this is not happening because these wells have been shut down one by one, little by little, all over the years. And from my side, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. Very interesting presentation. Yeah, if the audience have questions, and we already have 4, please put them in the Q&A box. Yeah, we will answer the questions later on after all the speakers have gone through their presentation. So I would like now to open the floor for Alexandra. Alexandra, take us through your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. So it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Alexandra Campbell-Ferrari. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Water Security and Cooperation, and also a professor of water law at 2 of the law schools here in Washington, D.C. So it's a pleasure to be here and happy to talk about law. I think law is one of the things that we rarely discuss with respect to water. It's kind of similar to water insofar as it's the hidden rule book and hidden network of laws and policies and institutions and governance that's behind and ensuring that we actually can achieve water security and universal access to water and sanitation, not just today, but in the future, and consistently and equitably. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just what law is first. And I always like to start with this idea that law is at the heart of water security because we actually have the control to write the rules that govern how we use water, how we treat water, and what we do with water. Now, it doesn't mean that it's easy to implement those rules, but we decide what that rule book is. We write the law. And so that is a really important thing to remember here. We have a lot of control over the rules that we decide and create and develop and implement and enforce that govern everything we do with respect to water quality, water quantity, water equity, water governance, and institutions. And so for the CWSC, we focus on working with different stakeholders to develop and ensure that those laws are enabling us to actually achieve water security and universal access to water and sanitation. So in order to do that, when we started the organization almost 10 years ago, the first thing we did is actually define this concept of water security. So for us, we define water security as the ability to safeguard an availability of water sufficient to sustain lives and livelihoods and protect against threats to and from water. And for us, defining water security allows us to identify what kinds of laws and what kinds of provisions we need in order to actually get to that goal. So if water security is the goal, if universal access to water and sanitation is the goal, then we need to decide what are the kinds of provisions that create that network of rules or laws and policies and institutions that we need to get there. And so through the creation of something called the Renewal Platform, we found these and decided and created these 6 buckets of things. As we continue to look at laws, we kept coming back to, well, really, these are the 6 or 5 different kinds of laws that we really need in order to protect our water. So the first thing is we need laws that recognize and that guarantee equity and non-discrimination, right? We haven't achieved water security if we don't ensure that everybody, regardless of race, gender, nationality, culture, what have you, all have access at the same quality and level. The second is that we need someone to actually take action, to be the one who is implementing and enforcing the laws, right? So laws are wonderful words that we write and that are incredibly meaningful, but they take action. They require action to actually become meaningful, to become to have the impact that we desire. And so we need an institution and a governance model that actually takes those words on a page and makes them reality. The third thing is that we need our laws to actually have a clear purpose for preventing pollution. So the more that we prevent pollution, the healthier our water resources are, the more likely that our drinking water will be safe to drink, because our drinking water comes and is sourced from our water resources. Fourth, we need to actually properly manage our water resources and how we are allocating use and rights And so laws need to create that structure and framework for how we manage our water resources, when we conduct assessments of our water, and how we designate and determine that someone should have the right to use water for certain commercial and industrial and agricultural purposes. And then finally, as I said, law requires action. And so we need somebody who is responsible for implementing the law, for enforcing the law. And then when somebody doesn't actually comply with the law, we need there to be clear consequences for violating that law. There has to be some stick, something to say, hey, there is a consequence if you don't actually follow the rules that we've set forth. So what does this all look like? Why is law so critical to water security? Throughout, I've just identified some examples of how laws are actually moving us forward with respect to achieving some of these goals that I talked about. So from an equity perspective, we can look to Kenya's Environmental Management and Coordination Act of 1999, and it says that everybody has the right to have access to information relating to the implementation of that act, right? And so when we think about access to information, we don't necessarily think about equity, but think about how we know whether or not people actually are getting access to water, whether or not people are complying with the law, whether or not the appropriate implementing steps are being taken by the government. It's through information, it's through monitoring. And so having a law that says you have a right to access that information, that gives you information about what is happening with this law, that is a form of equity. I also mentioned here that one of the tricky things is that sometimes laws are well written, sometimes they are not well written, and sometimes they're kind of imperfect. And when I say they're not written well, sometimes they actually do the opposite of what we want them to do. In this instance, it's actually well written, but there's one little thing that kind of undercuts it by requiring or allowing for a fee to be charged in accessing that information, right? So certain people may not be able to get access to that information because you could be charged a fee. Another example of equity is that in El Salvador, they adopted the Ley de Recursos Hídricos in December of 2022, and it recognized for the first time rights to water and sanitation, so human rights to water and sanitation. And having that human right to water and sanitation recognizes a key part of equity that we have a right to actually have access to water and sanitation. And so that's now reflected in their national water law. From a contamination perspective, there's a lot of different examples of how laws act to prevent contamination. So from a rights perspective, in Kenya, their constitution actually recognizes a right to a clean and healthy environment. So that's a right that is adopted and included within the Constitution. When we turn to the United States, we have the Clean Water Act, which prohibits the discharge of pollutants into something called the waters of the United States, except as allowed by a permit. So you're prohibited from discharging any contaminants or pollution into waters of the United States unless you have a permit. So it's not a broad prohibition on releasing pollution. It does allow it, but you have to have a permit, and the laws stipulate the standards that have to be met when you are discharging contamination. Now, one of the things that's become a sticking point in the United States is this definition of waters of the United States. So for the past 50 years, there's been an ongoing debate, an ongoing pull and tug from administration to administration over what waters within the United States are actually covered by the Clean Water Act, which is a federal law. And so right now, after the second decision last year, we have a more limited understanding of what those waters are, which means the federal law has a smaller scope, which means the states have to step up and protect things like wetlands that are no longer necessarily protected under the federal law. We can also then turn to the EU. So if we look to the EU Water Framework Directive, it requires member states to establish emission or discharge controls based on best available techniques and best environmental practices if we're talking about diffuse or non-point source pollution. And so actually being able to determine when there has been contamination is a huge part of this, right? If there isn't a standard or some kind of emission limit or discharge limit, then we don't know if there's been contamination. So having that discharge limit in place allows us to say, hey, you A, cannot discharge more than this set amount, and B, if you do, then you're in violation of the law. One more example is enabling us to actually identify the source of contamination. So laws that require the getting a license, as I mentioned earlier in the US context, getting a license before discharge is an important part of this as well. Because without that requirement to get a discharge, we don't really know who's discharging what contamination. So requiring that somebody get a permit before discharge is important in terms of understanding sources of contamination. Just a few more examples from the managing water resources and enforcement and penalties side. So from a managing water resources perspective, a good example of an opportunity to manage our water resources better is actually requiring assessments of our water resources. So in order for us to make better decisions about how we're using our water and who we're letting use it and where in the watershed we're allowing withdrawals and discharges is an assessment, and actually taking the time to study how our watersheds function and what the impacts are from different withdrawals and discharges and that whole concert of activity. Overseeing water use is another key part. Similarly to the water quality side, we need people to be required to get a license or a permit in order to know who is doing what and from what part of the watershed. So in the Sudan's Water Resources Act of 1995, the law requires that a license is necessary if you're going to withdraw water from either a surface water source or a groundwater source. From the enforcement side, so the enforcement, the penalties is another critical part to this. And so there needs to be some mechanism to hold people accountable to actually achieving the purpose of the law. So for example, within Nigeria's national environmental regulations, the environmental agency in Nigeria has the authority to actually modify or suspend or revoke a permit in the event that the permit holder is contravening the contamination limitation. So if they're discharging more, they're withdrawing more water than they should, then the agency can actually take away the permit or modify it and put additional conditions on it. So there's a consequence for failure to comply with the law. So all of this feeds into demonstrating how important that law is to creating that framework for governing and achieving our water security from a water quality, water quantity, and equity perspective. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Took me a while to get my camera on. Thank you very much, Alexandra. Very interesting presentation about the importance of law and legal systems for water security. We can't do without that, and I'm sure there will be questions coming in the Q&A session. So our next speaker will be Lara. Lara, you are the final one for us, and then we will go into the Q&A. So please take us through your presentation.
Great. Thank you, Jan. So my name is Lara Marcial. I work for an engineering consulting firm called SRT Consultants based in the San Francisco Bay Area. Now, I work with a large variety of water utilities and water suppliers. And most of the time when we talk about innovation in the water sector, we often hear about all the great things and inspiring things that large water utilities are doing. And I thought that today I'd take the opportunity to talk about my experience working within our small water systems program, sharing and showcasing how small water suppliers implement innovation, enhance their water security in the context of California's regulatory landscape. So I'll just start with some context. So, what do I mean when I talk about small water systems? So under the Safe Drinking Water Act, they are defined as water systems that are serving 10,000 customers or less. So they're also sometimes defined in terms of number of connections. We're usually talking about 3,000 connections or less, just to put in perspectives. Now, For context, 80 to 85% of water systems in California serve less than 10,000 people, especially in rural and peri-urban areas. Now, there are subcategories within that small water systems definition, but you can imagine that there's a large variety of sizes, operational needs, and governance models. I couldn't talk about small water systems without mentioning the main ongoing policy direction across the US, which is to consolidate those small water systems into existing larger utilities or new consolidated entities. And this is a lot of the times as a result of the fact that small water systems are 13 times more likely to violate the Safe Drinking Water Act than larger water systems, and more often fail to fulfill the human right to water. And a lot of times they're dealing with challenges including limited technical, financial, and managerial capacity, a smaller customer base, aging infrastructure, limited staff, and often very limited redundancy. Now, I did want to introduce some of the key drivers of innovations that lead water utilities, big or small, to seek innovative solutions. And most of the times we, of course, deal with the combination of these that are all intertwined, but including regulatory pressures and policy changes, water supply scarcity, technological advancements, cost opportunities for cost or resources savings, availability of funding, the need for improved quality and reliability of services, and the need also for increased resilience in the face of climate uncertainty. Now, as I've mentioned, I mentioned policies and regulations as a driver, and I think that they are sometimes seen as a potential hindrance that could cause increases in cost and complexity. But based on my experience of and kind of evolving, working with water suppliers in the California regulatory landscape, I see policies that push suppliers to innovate, mandating a change and a certain level of resilience. For example, this one's Senate Bill 552 about drought resiliency that mandates small water systems to create drought resiliency plans, encouraging them to adopt water efficient solutions. And on the other end, policies that that enable suppliers to innovate by providing funding, technical assistance, and streamlined approvals. So that could be policies that lead to the enaction of regulations that streamline technology approval or guide the implementation of new technologies and practices while maintaining public health. And one of the examples is this Senate Bill 200 that established a safe and affordable funding for equity and resilience program, which provides funding and technical assistance for small and disadvantaged systems and supports infrastructure improvements and consolidation efforts, among other things. Now, I wanted briefly to introduce two examples. Now, as a first example, we are looking at a small water system located in coastal Northern California with just about 20 connections, which due to regulatory changes had to develop its own supply sources and treatment. Now, they were previously served by a neighboring system, were put in this situation with a shift in regulations that they had to develop their own system. And faced with a very tight timeline, limited financial capacity, and the water sources that they had available, which in this case involved two surface water sources vulnerable to drought. We worked to establish new infrastructure, and in this specific case, right, some of the innovation involved touched on their optimization of supply and driven by the regulatory changes, their need for resilience, and in order to optimize their supply, they implemented the reuse of the backwash streams from their 2 treatment trains, and also implemented sensors and controls to allow them to utilize as much water as possible from those 2 surface water sources they had available, while also needing to take into account the water rights restrictions. I now want to take you to a second example where we will be looking at a small community in the desert of Southern California, here with 96 connection. And it is with a system in a complete state of disrepair, where without reliable potable water service. And here the drivers were, of course, regulatory in nature, but of course also from a dire need for improved services and to fulfill the human right to water. Now, in this specific case, in the situation where the water company operating this system was falling apart, the innovative approach there lay in the creation of a nonprofit organization by a community member, which to lead the overhaul of the system. And what this governance model essentially allowed them to develop key partnerships and access funding from the state to plan, design, and construct new facilities to restore potable water access. Now, these are just 2 brief examples to show a little bit partially the regulatory landscape and how small water systems suppliers are turning to innovative solutions to fulfill their customers' needs. Now, some of the key lessons learned, of course, there are many, but I just wanted to mention a couple here that we see come again and again. So the technical considerations, being selecting the right technology for the scale, the needs, and of course, according to the constraints. Now, addressing financial constraints, again, often involve a mix of funding sources, grant strategies, and partnerships. Staffing and capacity building is an issue, I think, that is at the forefront of a lot of utilities and stakeholders in the water sector, and small water systems. Of course, again, in the face of some of their constraints, often will turn, for example, to contract operators to match their operations, budgets, and compliance needs. And finally, I think this is a general one that also comes with problem solving and innovating, but the ability to adapt and pivot based on the needs is also critical. I then wanted to talk about some of the general strategies for successful innovation adoption that we've experienced working, both with very, very small water systems and like very large urban water utilities alike, that we explore with suppliers of all sizes again, and that we aspire to help water systems to integrate. Strategies from the ideation phase, which include driving management and community buy-in, engaging stakeholders and developing key partnerships, investigating alternative funding strategies, all the way to the implementation phase, or how to help spur this bring ideas into the implementation phase by creating pilot programs before full-scale adoption, prioritizing scalable and modular solutions, and of course also involving operators through training and buy-in. Now, I wanted to finish with, again, some paths that we've identified that can support small water systems, and not just small water systems, of course, but improve water security through innovation. And in the context that we work in, so we've seen that policies that mandate increased resilience, combined with technical assistance funding, that allow small water systems to meet their regulatory requirements and improve services. Technology suppliers being flexible and catering to the need for pilot testing through different financing models to make it more accessible to go from pilot testing to permanent installation. Peer-to-peer learning programs where opportunities for utilities to learn from each other, alternative consolidation models that create more resilient water systems and opportunities again for pooling resources. And finally, training and workforce development on best practices and innovative approaches, including digital tools, decentralized treatment, data analytics, to ensure that innovation adoption is practical. So this is all I had for you all today, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Lara, for this great presentation. Yeah, I think we have heard three very interesting presentations about water security and the relation with policies, with law, with innovation, and how to adopt these ways. In the Q&A box, there are quite a number of questions already. I think we have 14 or 15 questions, which we can't cover all in the next 10 minutes. So I will pick a few of them and will ask the panelists to answer them. And yeah, first question I would like to ask is going to Ruben, and it's coming from Najib. He is talking about the wastewater management in the city of Porto. So the question is here, if not, what could be the percentage of sewer area in the population relying on non-sewer systems for wastewater management, and are there any regulatory measures for pollution control in non-sewer systems in the area?
Well, all city of Porto is is infrastructure. Okay, so this means that all households are connected to our sewage system. In addition to that, we don't have a combined sewage system, which means that stormwater runs in a different pipe. So on one hand, and I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly. On one hand, the accessibility to our sewage infrastructure is 100%. When the problem is, and well, now I'm connecting this to the flooding problems and to the stormwater, to the stormwater episodes. The problem are the overflows. Okay, so when it rains a lot, are we able to control the overflows in the sewage network? And are we monitoring the pollution that comes with it? And at the moment, I can very plainly tell you that we are still not there. Okay, it's very difficult to monitor like in real time the pollution levels that result from our overflows. Actually, not all the overflows occur where they should be happening or as planned, okay, because there are interconnections sometimes between the stormwater and the sewage networks. On one hand, there are infiltrations of groundwater of groundwater in the sewage system. And what happens when it rains a lot is that our pumping stations may not be able to elevate all the wastewater, which means that overflows can occur in very unpredictable places. So we have two challenges to solve at the moment, which is this. To take care of the interconnections and infiltrations that we have in the sewage network, to completely map all the overflows, especially those that are happening in places completely unpredictable. And third, to establish a monitoring framework regarding the pollution that comes from these overflows. And this is something that concerns us a lot because actually under the EU urban wastewater directive, we will be obliged to do so in the near future. So we are already taking steps in order to control this kind of phenomena. I don't know if I answered your question, but well.
Okay, thank you, Ruben. Yeah, I think we would also like to give a question to Alexandra then. Alexandra, there's a question here in the chat about has the implementation and enforcement of licensing been successful in the case study areas you mentioned? Are there any reporting on statistics?
Great question. So I think I highlighted it in some fashion, but just to highlight it, sometimes there's a discussion about the value of law because it's not being implemented. And so I do like to highlight that there is a difference between the law as it is written and interpreted by judges and through judicial processes, and then how it's implemented and actually enforced and actualized, right? So as I said during the presentation, laws require action. And so sometimes we don't see that action, right? The law may actually require permitting, but there may be people out there who are withdrawing water or discharging without a permit. And so there are efforts, and I did respond to one of the questions saying a lot of this requires capacity. So people actually going out and checking the watershed, conducting assessments, monitoring the quality levels of water resources for changes, monitoring withdrawal levels and the flow levels of surface waters and groundwaters to ensure that there aren't withdrawals or discharges that are not anticipated. Even compliance. So in the United States, there's something called the ECHO database, ECHO, and you can find information about the compliance levels for permits. And what we found actually through some research we're doing right now is that compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act is pretty high in terms of health-based standards. When you look at compliance for wastewater treatment standards, it's a little bit lower with respect to similarly situated health-based standards. And so that's an area for improvement, that there needs to be greater enforcement and greater discussions in terms of compliance with those standards. So there are mechanisms out there to track that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, maybe a question I have, and I haven't heard you in your presentation about that, but what I see a lot in terms of law is that countries are starting to create legal entities for a river or for a lake, or to represent the river or lake in a court case, for instance. What's your opinion about that, to create or to enhance water security?
I'm always excited to see new approaches being taken. I think there are some obvious pros that the river has its own interests, right? The river is not interested in how we're using it. It can be seen as a distinct entity. My focus is largely, and my organization's focus is largely on making sure that our water resources work for us, which means that we have to both protect the river and allow for withdrawals for drinking water and other purposes to meet our needs. But I think giving and creating rights for rivers is a fascinating mechanism to at least ensure that the interest of the environment and the interest of the river are heard in the discussion. I think it's very easy to push them aside, but I like to ensure, for me, some of the most effective discussions are when we remind and discuss with people why the environment is important for our existence and make that real. It becomes a little bit easier for people to understand like why we bothered to protect the environment. That if you say, look, of course, we're protecting trees for trees and rivers for rivers, but we're really doing this also for human survival. Without these water resources, without the environment, without trees, humanity would suffer significantly. And so making that connection helps. And but I also think that creating that mechanism is helpful for the dialogue.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I would like to finish off with one question for Lara then. Lara, there's a question here from Sylvia. asking small utilities may not be reaching economic efficiency due to lack of economy of scales. So what are the criteria, or what criteria do you use to determine when consolidation should be pursued in small water utilities that are struggling to operate?
Thank you, Sylvia. This is a great question. And actually, so the one of the efforts that is underway is to conduct a needs assessment of the water systems across California. And in this assessment, it's essentially a risk assessment that is conducted, and it takes into account a few different risk indicators. So the way that they assess the performance and the services of the water systems and if they are failing, they're essentially categorized being at risk, highly at risk, or failing water system. And this is how they are then prioritized for consolidation and for receiving support for consolidation. So some of the main risk indicators, there are four of them. They consider water quality, accessibility, affordability, and TMF capacity, which is technical, managerial, and financial capacity. So it's usually the result of kind of this quite comprehensive assessment of risk of this of water system of their risk to be failing there, of supplying safe and sustainable and affordable potable water service. And then they're prioritized in different categories.
Yeah, great. Question I have about these small systems. So you're talking here about really very small systems with, I think one of them was showing 96 connections. How do you demonstrate compliance in these systems? I saw you had a few slides with monitoring equipment and sensors, but how do you show compliance in terms of water quality in these small systems?
Yeah, so and this is where it comes into play. So again, systems are categorized based on the number of connections that they serve, and the people that they serve. And depending on which categories that they fall into, they actually have to comply with specific requirements. So some of the larger systems, of course, have to have more stringent water quality monitoring requirements, but essentially across the board, and this is where regulations kind of push this system to find ways to implement the proper monitoring. And this is, of course, again, where I think one of the key pieces is when those regulations are kind of tied with technical assistance funding that can support the system reach compliance, which is in place and is kind of working somewhat. So yeah, and there's, again, I think that one of the key takeaways is that there are kind of specific regulations targeting those small water systems that find a balance between, of course, their capacity and maintaining public health, of course, and safe, sustainable, and affordable water service.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I think looking at the time, we have to wrap up at this point. I think we had three really great presentations today, so I would give a round of applause here virtually to all the speakers. Thank you very much for being with us, and I would like to hand over now to Aaron again with a few more announcements to make.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you to all the speakers for your insightful presentations. Just before we wrap up, I want to share with you some upcoming webinars that we have, a webinar and a workshop. So next week, we'll be discussing water benchmarking, basics and examples of best practices, and this will be run by our benchmarking specialist group. And then we have a workshop about how can we support the contributions of women in the water industry, and this will be run by the Sustainability in the Water Sector Specialist Group. So please feel free to go to the IWA website to learn more about these webinars. Also, as Jan mentioned, we have the Water and Development Congress coming up in Thailand later this year in December, and we have extended the call for submissions. So please feel free to take a look at the event website and see if you would like to contribute to the program. Also, as a webinar attendee, we would like to offer you a 20% discount on your membership as a new member. If you would like to join the IWA, so please feel free to scan this QR code or use this code that is on the screen right now to apply for your membership. And with that, I say thank you for joining. Thank you again to the organizers, Jan, Blanca, and the speakers, Ruben, Lara, Alexandra, for sharing all of your knowledge and your experiences. We absolutely appreciate it here at the IWA. And for the attendees, thank you so much for joining us.
And
I
thank you
wish
for
you...
hosting us, Aaron.
Yes,
Yeah.
sure, no problem. It's my pleasure. All the best, everyone.